Hey everyone. Today, my friend Jonathan Parker and I discuss A Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell. We'll link to the book in the show notes and hope you enjoy the conversation. Okay, so I want to start doing a summary. I was actually going over this in my head, but you can help me out because you're an English teacher. To me, this was a very serious Malcolm Gladwell book. In the sense that, the Malcolm Gladwell book tells you everything you need to know about at the beginning of the book, and then the rest of the book is just examples of it.
Iterations of the same thing.
Except I probably not doing this justice, but this is the same thing, except the evidence that he brings to bear to support his thesis is just overwhelming. The breadth of genres that he pulls from and all the different areas, it's beyond. So I think the summary should just be the basic thesis, and then we'll kind of get into whatever we want to talk about from there. So the basic thesis is there are these two visions, and he spent some time at the beginning of the book talking about what a vision is. It's interesting. Both of us came to this book through the Shiloh Brooks podcast and Coleman Hughes talking about it. And I actually re-listened to that today in the car, just as I was walking back and forth, just as I was moving back and forth between schools. And Coleman Hughes says he doesn't like the term vision. He likes instincts better because he thinks these are actually just kind of these natural inclinations that we have. And they don't necessarily have to be larger prophecies about how the world works. But Sowell definitely sees them that way. He sees them in sort of I think, prophetic terms, right? That we kind of have these visions of how the world should work. And there are two visions. There's a constrained vision and an unconstrained vision. Do you want to jump in here and give your best descriptions of constrained and unconstrained?
Sure. So one way I heard somebody talk about it on a different podcast that I can't even remember anymore is constrained is limited and unconstrained is unlimited. So it's basically, what do you think about human nature? If you're from the constrained vision, you believe that human nature is fundamentally flawed, that there's something wrong with it, that we will never be able to get past. The best we can do is to try to hedge it in, to put up fences around it to make sure the worst things don't get out. You want to limit those, you want to constrain them. Whereas the unconstrained vision is, no, we are limitless as people, that there's no end to the refinement that we can engage in, and the best among us will lift up the lowest among us until we all live in this utopia that's the best that we can possibly be. I think my cynicism crept in a little bit when I was describing the unconstrained vision there.
Yeah, right. Well, in fairness, Sowell also, although he does a really good job of not allowing his cynicism to creep in the book.
In this book, yes, but in literally everything else he's written, he says this is his favorite book,
right?
His own authorship. But in every other book, it's clear that he's constrained.
Right. But he does that's why I thought it was interesting, because he does a really good job here not doing that. So let's just speak practically. What would be an example of that, right? So if you're in the constrained vision, then if you're talking about, let's say, what was a good example here was a good example, right? There's a gang related violence event, right? One member of one gang kills a member of another gang, right? So in the constrained vision, you realize, well, these are rational actors, right? Acting essentially within the universe of incentives that animates them, right? And similar to the way one company would try and take out their competition. This is simply what's happening in this instance, right? And that's human nature. There's nothing you can do about that. Humans are always going to behave that way. The best way you can address the problem of gang violence is by, trying to alter the incentive equation, right? So that it's either, really disadvantageous for a person to commit an act like this. They're going to go to jail. It's going to be intense. They're going to ruin their lives, whatever it might be. Or you create various incentives to pull people out of gangs, whatever it might be. But that's really the only way to address it. You can't fundamentally change who people are. Whereas in the unconstrained vision, right, you might think of this as, well, if we just had better kindergarten, better family care, better services for, the communities where people get drawn into gang violence, we actually could achieve 0 people going into gangs. Does that sound right?
Yes. I mean, I think they're loaded terms now, but the way, maybe it's passé terminology now, but the way I thought about it is the constrained vision cares about equality of opportunity, that everyone has the same chances to make the same choices and they get where they get. Whereas the unconstrained vision cares about the outcome, equality of outcome, that everybody should be at some desired outcome, and we will drag them there.
And there's this messianic piece, right? That if you just get everyone to equality of outcome, Mashiach is here, right? Like we're in great shape, right? Like that's how we get there. So where do you want to start?
So, I mean, I'll start with one of my concerns about the book, which I really liked. I was telling you before we started recording that this has really influenced a lot of the conversations I've been having with people since I finished it. Just while people are talking, I start trying to assess what is their basic value from which they are arguing, right? Which side of this are they on? Because I feel like if I understand the premise that's behind what they're saying, I'll be able to understand where they're trying to go.
Right.
Right, because he makes the case several times that these values, these visions, they're not based in any sort of evidence, right? They are inclinations, they're visions, they're gut instincts, they're hardwired into who you are as an individual, and so you'll map the facts that you get onto your vision to make sure your vision makes sense.
Let me ask you a question. I don't want to cut you off because I want to get back to your point, but so I thought about this. In some sense, so Jonathan Haidt, before he became, the crusader against social media, I think his early work was about the psychological roots of liberals versus conservatives.
This is like the coddling of the American mind type of stuff?
Yeah, right? That at the end of the day, people are, there are certain just things that predispose people, right? Like if you look at certain personality traits, in-group, out-group will be very high among conservatives, whereas empathy will be very high among liberals, right? I think that's right? So there's these sort of, I guess you could say, either inborn or early sort of dispositions that we have that incline us toward one way or another. And I gather that Soul thinks sort of the same thing, that we're sort of just inclined towards that. But that's obviously not always the case. Like Soul himself started out as a Marxist. And, I'm totally the typical, started out liberal in my 20s and I'm much more conservative in my 40s, right? So how does the vision change? What process do you think a person undergoes that changes their vision? And maybe this is getting literary, but what does that mean for prophecy or any of these things? Do prophecies change? Do our fundamental inclinations change over time?
So I think he makes it clear that people don't fall neatly into one camp or the other. He makes it clear a bunch of times that it's a spectrum.
Right.
Even though the people he brings in, the proofs that he brings in are clearly in one camp or another. But it's definitely a spectrum. And I mean, it makes sense that as you age, where you are on the spectrum will change a little bit. But I think your basic inclination tends to stay the same. Have you ever read, I'm going to terribly misrepresent it, Determined by Robert Sapolsky?
No, not yet. First of all, it's a huge book.
Yes.
But I've seen a lot. I mean, I've seen a bunch of interviews on it and so on, but it's on my list. Yeah.
So he goes, I mean, it's been a few years since I read it, but he goes into a lot of detail there about how hardwired we are and where that hardwiring comes from. But Sowell makes it pretty clear that both the constrained and unconstrained person want the same thing, right? They both want
a better
the
world.
Human society to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just their vision, their gut instinct about how to get there that is different, right? So both of them want that gang that you were mentioning to stop fighting. They don't want that violence to be happening. No, they don't want anybody shot in the street. Neither of them want that. And so I think your trajectory from your 20s to your 40s in terms of your political outlook or your philosophical outlook, you probably haven't really changed what the goal is. all that's really shifted is how you think we can get there.
Right. That's good. Okay, what point were you making before? Sorry. Good.
You're asking me my basic feeling about it. So yeah. I really liked it, and it's shaped how I've interacted with people since then.
Can't see anyone the same.
I imagine it'll change once I read a new book, and then my total vision of all of them will change again. I have a very short memory.
You have one book memory.
If that. But the one criticism I had of the book, as I was reading it the whole time, was how many books and essays have I read where somebody is like, these are the binaries.
Right.
These are the ones. So for Sowell, these are the two binaries, constrained and unconstrained. And he tries to explain all of philosophy and economics and religion and everything through those two. But I imagine if you were Soloveitchik, you could do the same thing with Adam 1 and Adam 2. I imagine if you were in the Gemara and you were the Tanaim, you could do it by Hillel and Shammai. Like, everybody has their binary that they break the world down into. So I went into this preparing to be frustrated. I liked it in the end, but I went in prepared to be frustrated.
In that sense, why? Why would it be frustrating for you?
Because it's just a trope. It's just another gimmick.
Right.
It's not for him. Clearly, this book is his way of seeing the world, and it has framed the world for lots of people. Do
you ever feel that way about the humanities in general? That they're all just different frameworks and metaphors for how we think about humans, right? And it could be psychology, it could be philosophy, it could be, literature. They're just sort of all of these different avenues. And if you're in one avenue, you're going to see everything through that lane, right? And by the way, it's true for the sciences also. My dad's a chemist, and for him, chemistry was kind of everything. Yeah. That's kind of how I saw the world.
And if you take physics is the foundation of chemistry. You can't have biology without physics.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same. Yeah.
And that's why
these disciplines, even though they're disciplines in themselves, they become kind of metaphors, right, for how we understand humans.
Yeah. And that's why if you go to any good senior English class, grade 11, grade 12 university, what are they spending half their time on? Psychological analyses of the characters, looking at the historical context of the author.
Right.
That's how they're unpacking it. It's because they understand that these are just different facets of the same thing. So in the same way, Sowell this is his facet for understanding humanity. And he can understand economics this way. Why does he have this theory? Why does he have this theory? Why does this NRA person also line up behind libertarians who don't want to have taxes? Those are not really related, but now they are.
Right. So what got my attention right off the bat was, how does this fit into the world of education? Yeah. Obviously. Right. What's interesting is when I ask myself that question, it's not immediately clear to me how it does. Right. And I can see, not just examples of the constrained vision or the unconstrained vision within education, but it's not entirely clear to me what education is, how it's operating. Is it operating in a constrained world, or is it operating in an unconstrained world? On the one hand, teachers seem to me to be very constrained. If you talk to an average teacher, they will present a very constrained vision, right? I got this class, and some of them are going to do great, and some of them are going to do mediocre, and some of them are not going to do well, and that's just the way it is. And what I'm doing as an educator is just trying to manage the margins, right? Adjust. I think Sowell says that, something more explicitly to that regard, just kind of make small marginal adjustments on the end. That's basically the best you can hope for. But when you talk to schools, certainly, that are selling themselves to prospective parents, when you speak with the various industry consultants and the people who come in and people who write about education, and I'm guilty of this as well. I've stuff I've written are big sweeping essays about how we can change education. Those could be considered unconstrained, right? So that's kind of what struck me right off the bat.
Yeah. So I think part of that is also the tension about where education has come from and where education is going, right? So if you're somebody who values students' achievement over their self-esteem, which I would say is the majority of high school teachers, you're really working from a constrained vision, saying my marks are objective, my tests are objective, you put in that work, you'll get the mark that you deserve. But then I was reading an article in EdWeek yesterday, And they had this phrase that I had never heard before. They were talking about teachers changing kids' marks. And one of the teachers said, and this is the phrase I wrote down because I thought it was good, grace before grades. That having the kid feel good about themselves is more important to me than the grade that they earned. I'm doing like quotation marks in there. That more important than the grade that they earned. And that, for me, is a big shift.
What was the justification for that?
So the article was really about...
That to me sounds very unconstrained, by the way.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
So I'm saying,
Yeah.
I think the model under which I grew up, and I assume you grew up, and probably even in university went through, was very much results-oriented. Objective, achievement, standards. This is what you have to do if you want to succeed at the school. Just do it. This article, the entire article, was about teachers' different reasons for increasing kids' marks that were unrelated to their academic performance. The whole article. So some of them talked about getting pressure from kids who were applying for competitive programs and needed marks that they didn't earn. Pressure from parents was another one. And then this teacher was talking about the concept of grace before grades. It matters to me that the kid feel good about himself.
I mean, what strikes me there is it really changes the goal. I guess my question would be, isn't there a better way for kids to feel good about themselves, right? Like, why put them in an academic setting, right? Which is, like a sports game or like a workout routine, right? Like the goals are somewhat objective, right? I mean, you can get wishy-washy in the humanities and how, but for the most part, the goals are objective. And you either achieve them or you don't. And that's not to say that there isn't room for grace, but why have grace here? Meaning, if your goal is for kids to feel good about themselves, give them projects that are, have no loosely defined goals, but everyone gets to participate and contribute in some way. And you can give a lot of positive reinforcement around that. That's great. Right? Maybe, but you're not like, why are you trying to force that, that square peg into this round hole? Like, school is just not structured that way. It's not set up that way. So why should grace happen here? I guess that's the thing that
I would go even farther than that. I would say that what you're offering the student with that sort of grace is just a momentary reprieve, and really you're crippling them for their adulthood. That by giving them unearned marks now, they feel good for the moment. Oh, I got a 95 or whatever, a 95 that they didn't have to work for, but at some point that's going to bite them in the bum, right? The fact that they don't equate. So you gave my only two examples of places in Western education where kids still innately understand the connection between the effort put in and the results that come out, right? Like no
sports and
the gym.
Right.
And you could push that out to the military, but I would say that's very much along the same lines in terms of athleticism and group team mentality. Those are the only two places where kids innately know that the more free throws I shoot in practice, the more likely I am to hit the free throws in the game. That the more I focus on my form with a bench press, the more times I do it in a week, the more I'll be able to lift later and the bigger my gains will be. But if you took that to a kid in math and said, well, your teacher gave you 10 problems to do for homework and you did one of them, don't you think you'd do better if you did 10? They'd probably just shrug their shoulders at you. The connection is lost.
Yeah. And that's where this idea of grace doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it's almost like this teacher from the article is saying school's pointless, right? Like it's almost like school is oppressive in some way. Okay, so maybe now that I think about it, maybe that takes us back to the problem is, if school is fundamentally a constrained endeavor, where inevitably a large number of students are not going to be successful, then maybe that's what this teacher is struggling with. It's like, oh, I can't handle an environment. Maybe you have an unconstrained teacher meeting a constrained environment, right? And saying, I can't handle this. I need everyone to be successful. So I can't change the standard because not everyone is going to be able to achieve the standard, right? And obviously I have questions about whether it's possible for everyone to achieve a standard. I think it's, or at least I would say at this point in my career, I think it's far more possible than we allow for. Meaning we put so many constraints unrelated to what we're talking about. We put so many barriers, right? Including like age-based matriculation. Everyone has to move on the same year. And you know all about this from me, but time-bound learning, the fact that everyone has to learn in a specific time frame, like all of that stuff. You don't have to look past reading. Everyone masters reading simply because we accept the fact that it's totally reasonable to learn how to read anywhere between the age of 3 and the age of 8, right? And once you just lift those barriers, you're like, oh, so then, yeah, everyone can actually master reading. Well, why don't we apply that to all sorts of other learning endeavors, and maybe we can get a far larger number of students who are actually achieving the benchmark and achieving that standard. But leave that aside. The teacher in the typical school system is not going to feel that way. Is not going to feel that he or she has the ability to do that. And so the teacher's constrained, but the teacher wants to be unconstrained. And so grace is this way of flipping the script.
Yes, but I think there's definitely space for the unconstrained vision in education. Like both the constrained teacher and the unconstrained teacher, at the end of it, want the same thing for the student. Right? Like, so what we're saying about all those other elements. If you are a constrained teacher and you believe that the role of the school is to give every student the opportunity to succeed to the best of his or her ability, it is to minimize the damage done to their adulthood, like their burgeoning adult selves, by training them to be the best people they can be, then the current school model that most schools exist under is the right model for you. But there are models that don't work that way. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's basically there's a model of school called the free school, where there are teachers around who can teach any subject. And there are no set class times, nothing. And the kids are there, and when enough kids group together and are like, okay, we want to learn math, they go to the math teacher and they learn math.
Does the school expect, like, is it like an experiment where they like float around until they like glob together and think of math? Or is there some structure?
The school facilitates them coming to an agreement about what they want to learn. Mm-hmm. But there's no compulsion for them to learn any set subject. The fundamental belief is that you will probably be here for, like you were saying, longer than 4 years. You are probably not going to be going to an elite post-secondary institution after this, but you are the type of person who needs to find his or her way to the learning. And
is this like a second chance school? Are most of these kids coming from?
Most of the kids are. Yeah. Most people do not opt in as a first. Mm-hmm. But it's been around for forever. Like it started in England, then there's one in Boston.
What do you think about that, like as an educator? I want to leave aside the like, oh, they won't get into Harvard argument. Okay, like let's leave that aside. Let's actually assume like that you can succeed in life if you don't go to Harvard, right? Just as an educator, like in terms of actually the quality of their learning and the quality of their education, do you think that's a model that's better than the core curriculum model that we operate under?
I don't think it's better for most kids. For some kids, it's the better model.
Why?
For most kids have the combination of upbringing from their parents and genetic and biological wiring that predisposes them to be able to learn something even though they don't see the value directly.
I get that, but you're still instrumental. Like you're saying that's kids can do it, but I'm telling you, why should they do it? Meaning, why shouldn't learning
be? Because most kids won't find their way to things that we as adults and the adults before us and the adults before them found to be meaningful, right? Like most kids will not on their own find their way to Shakespeare. But if we have decided that it is critical that everybody have a common canon So we have a common language so that when 6 comes out and Juliet comes out, everyone can go and say, like, oh, I see what they did there. They're being subversive about a classic tale while staying true to themes that are essential to humanity about empowerment and growth and teenagers being stupid.
What you're saying essentially is society falls apart if everyone just is free to learn whatever they want.
Society as we know it definitely would fall apart. There's an assumption that if you're an employer, let's say you're running an engineering firm, right? And somebody comes to you with a degree from U of T. You say, oh, I know what that degree means because I know all the subjects that you were forced to learn there. And when you applied to U of T engineering, they looked at your transcript from high school like, oh, I know what they learned.
Okay. I have 2 pushbacks on your points. I actually see 2 points here. I'll start with the one you just said. The engineering firm could still do that if they wanted to by simply saying, here are all the subjects we want you to know coming into our firm. These are important to us, and we're going to test you on them. We're going to give you a battery of tests as part of your application process, right? So if you aspire to work in this firm, you have the free choice to then decide that these are the things you want to discipline yourself to study for. It does not have to come by way of a core curriculum. And remember, when it comes by way of a core curriculum, you means you're forcing a whole bunch of people who will never want to work at that firm to also study those things, right? So there's some cost to that as well, right? Where you presumably could do this in a more efficient manner where the firm just builds itself up as the best possible firm that some subset of the population is going to want to go work at. And when they're ready to go work there, they know they have to spend some time training themselves on these things.
Right, but that's the story of the constrained vision. The constrained vision, Sowell talks about it a bunch of times. The story of the constrained vision is trade-offs, that I accept that I'm going to have to give up this thing now to get that thing later, right? So that I accept that I'm going to have some kids who don't ever need to learn grade 10 math. But I'm going to make sure that everyone takes grade 10 math just so everyone who's able to has a chance to get to grade 11, even though some kids who should not have taken grade 10 math were forced to take it. There's a trade-off.
Right. So it occurs to me that the question then becomes, where do you draw the line? Like at what point, what are the things, what is the bare minimum, maybe the bare minimum is the wrong word. What are the foundational things that everyone has to learn, right? And when you talk about a common canon, like what comes to mind, so this is very like Tikva is starting this, Emet Academy, and they're this is like they're sort of reinvesting or re-articulating this vision of the canon, the classical canon of the West, and why that's important, and they connect that to the erosion of sort of Western values, right? And I guess the question I have about that, and in turn what you're saying is that really true for most people? Meaning, is it like you're an intellectual, right? So, who makes weird noises when I say that? Fine, but do most people see, right, a film and understand how it's a, twist on Shakespeare, right? Or are most people going to Marvel superhero movies and liking big explosions and just being like, living their lives normally and not actually, like, at least in a conscious way, grounded in sort of these common core values? And then I would ask, is this education meaningful for that group? Or are they somehow, even though they were C students and they were earning 60s and 70s in these subjects, right? They still absorb the values by osmosis. And even though they can't really articulate or tell you anything they learned, right, when they read Shakespeare, the values still cut through to them.
So I think you're asking 2 different things. I'll do the second one first. I think that yes, for most of the people, at least if you're just one of the humanities, right? Even if they forget all of the details of the story, or they forget all the dates they learned in history, or they forget the prakim in Tanakh, if they were taught well, then the themes will be enduring, and they will understand when those themes come up again later in life.
When you say understand, what do you mean? Just look around the people. Do they understand it like they could reflect on it, or do they understand it like in some implicit way?
I would bet that if I went to a student who I taught 20 years ago and asked them, just in general terms, how do you think the themes from Animal Farm that we read 20 years ago are relevant now? Like, what would Orwell say about today's world? It might take them a few minutes to like reflect or to jog their memories.
Or if you
they
gave
could
them
do
a
it.
basic primer and give
They
them
could do it. They could go back to it. Like these themes are timeless, and that's their value. So that was one of your questions. The other question was about how do you choose the canon, and I think that is a much stickier subject, especially in the modern era, because if you're saying the erosion of Western values, you are implicitly saying that the Western values are superior to the values from somewhere else, and that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. Like, oh, we do not need to study the oral traditions of Ethiopia because they're not Western. And that's going to rub a lot of people.
I'm not
I
bothered
know
by
you're
that.
not. I'm just saying that's
Right. I mean,
the world in which you live.
Right. But any value choice is a value of A over B. Right. So it's interesting. I actually think you did a good job explaining this idea of timeless themes to me and how that actually can play a role in the larger population, right? As beyond just the intellectuals. I come at it from a skills perspective. Like for me, I've been less interested in, is this a fundamental thing you need to learn? This theme, this idea, fundamental thing you need to learn versus these are fundamental skills you need to have, right? So like you need to be able to analyze, you need to be able to synthesize ideas, you need to be able to offer informed opinions about ideas, right? And to me, the course you take or what you study is much more of, is much more replaceable, right? As long as you're practicing those core skills. And so if I would envision like what would make sense as kind of foundational for every school to invest in, it would be the skills over the themes. Although I'm less interested in a society building project, right? Whereas the themes are. I mean, that's really, you learn Animal Farm in order to build society with certain values.
Right, but I would argue that in order to get to those skills that you're talking about, everybody needs to come with some basic toolbox, right? So if you want to have kids who have the ability to employ their analytical skills in economics, they're going to need some fundamental understanding of how math and graphing works.
Yes.
But you don't know what the 5-year-old is going to want to do when they're 15. So it's prudent for you to make everybody learn how to do math.
100%. I agree there are foundational things. I just wonder where we draw that line. I mean, like, look, we're both high school educators. What do kids really need to know coming out of elementary school? They need to know how to read. They need to know how to write. They need to have a basic numeracy. You could catch up, if you have sort of those three things, you could catch a kid up pretty quickly on almost everything else, right? So that's very minimal. Right. And, what you teach in social studies doesn't really matter so much. Even what they learn in science. I mean, they have, obviously there's maybe a slightly larger body of knowledge than what I just said. Okay. So now go into high school. High school, we jump a ton, right? And part of that is cognitive development. They're able to move much faster through the 4 years of high school than they probably were through any 4 years of elementary school, right? In terms of their knowledge. But that's also where we now have much more selected content that we are providing in that context. There, I wonder, like, if we've taken it too far. Is trig critical for everyone? I was just talking to a friend who's like a physicist and he's a PhD from Stanford. He's got like a startup, is super bright. And I asked him this question. He's like, well, of course, right? And he gave me like, in his mind, yes, but that's how he thinks about the world. Like, I don't know if trig is super important for everyone. Like, are you establishing some foundational value there? And so that's really where I wonder. Whereas the skill, like to me, analytic thinking, high level analytic thinking, which can happen actually in trigonometry, right? It can happen in the humanities. It can happen in all sorts of different studies. That is critical for everyone, right? Like everyone has the capacity, and to a certain point, but everyone has the capacity to acquire certain higher order thinking skills at a level beyond, I think, what we're doing right now. So it's really interesting. We like do all these subjects in far greater depth than they necessarily need, but we stay minimal on the skills. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think what you're saying is accurate. And I would guess that the reason that we do it is because it's easier to evaluate the way we do things now than it is to evaluate skills that are stretched across a broad range of things. And As you know, like you've written about it before, that the modern model of schooling is not built for what you're trying to achieve. The modern school model is built to get kids prepared to enter the workforce and get them out into specific jobs. And it's an industrial model.
Yeah.
It's not a model built.
Yeah, I'm glad you said industrial. I would say it's meant to weed out sorry, is a better way to phrase it is to
categorize and classify.
Exactly.
Yep.
To categorize and classify at a very early age, and I would say in a very sort of inappropriate manner, based on what we know now about how kids learn, how development takes place. Like, it just doesn't make sense anymore. But let's leave that for now. Okay, what was next on your observations about the book?
I don't know. For me, have you heard of Chesterton's fence? And basically, the idea of Chesterton's fence is that society as we know it has built up all of these fences. I mean, it's a very Jewish concept also. Like, why do we need to have this fence around the halacha? Well, so and basically what his premise is, it's okay to remove a fence, to take down a fence that you come across. But you're never going to know what the longer term ramifications are of removing that fence. So our society, over the thousands of years of development, we've built up all sorts of societal rules and mores, and institutions, and the unconstrained vision says we could just tear those things down. Like, I don't even know why we put those up in the beginning, because all that matters is getting to some outcome. And Chesterton's fence says, well, if you tear that down, you don't know what the other ramifications are going to be. Like, it's an inherently constrained vision. The constrained vision says, no, we've got to put up fences to keep in all of our evil ways and all of our lesser inclinations. And if we start taking those down, which is what society is, at least the way I see it, I'm a very constrained vision person, if that's not clear. I feel like society today is tearing down all these fences willy-nilly and not thinking about what the longer term ramifications are.
But isn't that the inevitable? Also, are you a Stranger Things fan?
I watched the first 2 seasons. I didn't watch the last 2. The kids got too old, and I'm like, this isn't cute anymore. I don't want to.
So for me, the homage to the 80s is like...
Oh, I love the corduroy. I love the horizontal brown stripes, the bicycles. Right. That's fantastic. Yeah. But they got old.
Right, they did. It's true. That tends to happen. So yeah, I'm still on it, watching the last season now. But like, here's the 1980s, which seems so quaint and fenced in, from the perspective of where we are now. But when we were growing up in the 1980s, we were also tearing down fences. Like, is that not the inevitable sort of arc of a free society, that it will tear down those fences? Either slowly or quickly, right? Depending on maybe whether you have an unconstrained or constrained vision. But there's no society that's just going to, keep building the fences or not touch the fences. Like, it's the net.
Have you met the Haredim?
They do, though. You see, even them, right? So the Haredim are just doing it on a more protracted timescale, right? But like, open a Mishpacha magazine and just look at the lifestyle that's on display, right? Every third ad is an ad for a luxury apartment in Malot Dafna or wherever, right? Like, the Haredi world is much more comfortable engaging in secular society proudly than they've ever been. The Haredi world has even embraced Israel. I mean, it's a funny thing now because you have a Haredi world in America which loves Chayalim as long as Haredim in Israel aren't among them, right? Like there's they've co-opted so many things that when I was a kid growing up in the yeshivish world in America were off limits, right? Like, the state of Israel was off limits to, in general, wasn't spoken about, like, wasn't referenced really. The secular world, there's so much, the Haredi world has been tearing down fences for a long time. The way they talk about abuse, the way there are all sorts of different things that.
Right, but I think it's the pace.
Right.
That's what you referenced.
Right. But the fences will eventually be torn down. So, this is the fundamental tension between progressive and conservative, but it's just a matter of how fast you do it.
Yes. But if you do it slowly and thoughtfully, then you're less likely to have the bad ramifications that come from just tearing things down willy-nilly. I mean, that's the Chesterton's fence model. I think that's what Sowell's model would be also.
I actually agree with that. Like, instinctively I agree with that. But here's the question I'll ask. Is that true? Or is it just because there's yes, tearing down the fences is risky and will result in bad outcomes that you can't foresee. But that will be as true for the Haredi community, right? As true for conservatives as it is for progressives. It's just that it will happen faster for progressives, and the conservatives will always have that contrast point to show, you see, right? But in the end, it comes for everyone, right? The mistakes will come for everyone at some point, regardless, right? And this is just the inevitable arc of a society, and why societies kind of come and go. And, the once great, secular Islamic societies went, and, the backward Christian societies, this is just how, the world works in some sort of cyclical way.
Right. But I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating in terms of what you just said, that the more conservative societies outlast those who are constantly tearing down fences. I grew up in a conservative household, big C Jewish conservative household. By the time I was already a teenager, I noticed that there were no young adults in any of the conservative synagogues that I know. Everybody I know who grew up in a conservative household either leaned into orthodoxy of some flavor, became a conservative rabbi who's more halakhically observant than his congregants, or doesn't have religion at all. Right. There was nobody who stayed as a conservative layperson, just because the pace of change became untenable. And then the whole thing just flew off into nothingness. I remember my wife and I, there was a time, I don't remember even, I was probably to pacify my parents, where before we decided it's something that we wanted to do, we would read through the JTS Tshuvot.
I love those.
On the topic. But it got to the point where JTS would publish 3 Tshuvot on the same topic that were totally at odds with one another, and would say Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim, that even though this person says you can't have a gay rabbi, and this person says we can have a gay rabbi, and that person says all rabbis have to be gay, all of those are accurate.
Right.
It's that doesn't even make sense. And now the conservative movement is what it is.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I guess my question, if I still have one, might be is that just inevitable? Meaning, the Haredi world is triumphant now. The Orthodox world is triumphant now. Look, we were right? And whereas the prognosticators in the 40s and 50s would have said that, conservative Judaism was the future. So great, they're triumphant now. But there's also Israel on the horizon, which is going to, the reality is as Israel grows as a center for the Jewish people and America assimilates, and, in, some number of years, for someone who could do math, can figure this out, you're going to end up with a few million Jews in the United States and 15 million Jews in Israel. All of a sudden, Orthodoxy in America is a different ballgame than it was. And and Israel is now morphing. You don't have Dati in Israel doesn't mean what Orthodox in America means, right?
That's very true.
So maybe the fence tearing down is coming for Orthodoxy. It's just a little bit, farther down the road.
What about you? What are your takeaways from the book?
So I'm still dwelling, if you want to do, I'm still dwelling on this education piece, right?
Okay.
To me, because I can't help but see everything through the lens of education. I guess I had this self-reflective moment. Okay, so I'm engaged in this project of teaching students to mastery, right? Which is built on the idea that I can, as teacher, define a standard within the curriculum that's real. That's a real standard, no grace, right? Is an actual standard. And I can set up a learning environment that is flexible enough and unconstrained enough to allow students, essentially 9 of 10 students, 90% of students to master that. And the reason I say 90% is there are 2 obstacles. Really, what I would tell you right now where I'm at in this project, it's somewhere between 60 to 90%, because there's 2 challenges that I'm encountering. One is apathy. So those are students who probably could master and meet the standard, but have just decided they're not really interested. But that's a challenge I think I could overcome, right? Or I think, anyone can overcome. It's just a matter of how you ignite that fire and overcome that apathy. So if you overcome the apathy piece, I think you can get to 90. And the reason I leave 10% is because inevitably in every educational environment, there are students who are not best served in that environment. I mean, there are students who, for whatever reason within their learning profile, probably will have more trouble or more challenges at meeting the learning standard than even my very open vision could provide for them. So I'm engaged in this project and I want to get 90% of students to master their learning. That seems very unconstrained for a person who considers himself to have a constrained vision. But at the same time, I want to hold to a standard, right? I want to make sure that everyone is actually meeting that standard. And I struggle with how we define that standard in this context. I kept coming back in my head to, am I constrained or unconstrained in this idea? And if I'm unconstrained, am I doomed to fail because I don't believe the unconstrained vision works? Or am I, just actually trying to, if you would look at it on the surface, my vision seems unconstrained, right? Like, no, it's obvious 90% of students are not going to earn an A, right? They're not going to really meet. That's never happened in education in the 150 years we've had this formal education system, right? But I guess I would argue that we are so far behind in changing the formal education system that we have to meet what we know today about student learning that this isn't really so unconstrained. I know that makes sense to you. I don't know if that made sense overall, but that's kind of what I kept coming back to. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
So just so I understand, you're saying that this approach is unconstrained because you believe in this limitless potential of the kids.
Not limitless, right? But it's an open question what the limits are going to be. I think the limits are much higher than we assume they are right now. Like, I think if you take just your average run-of-the-mill teacher teaching grade 10 math, let's say, right? That teacher will say, yeah, out of my class of 20 students, the 8 who got A's in my class, those are the only 8 who can get A's.
But you expect a bell curve. You expect a small percentage.
I mean, that teacher expects a bell curve.
Yes.
Right? I say that bell curve should shift significantly, to the right, right? To the right. Yeah. Like that would be like, there are many more students. We can get closer to 18 of 20 mastering that skill. Now, that doesn't mean 18 of 20 can master calculus, right? Like so there is some line.
There's a limit.
Yeah. And that's what I need. So it's constrained in that way, but it's unconstrained based on how we're thinking about it right now.
To connect this back to your analogy from the very beginning, where you were talking about the gang warfare in the streets. It sounds like your class is like, let's pretend they're like the gang in the street. And you were saying before that the constrained person would put in a bunch of like incentives, probably disincentives for gang violence, that they're going to go to jail or they're going to X, Y, and Z. How are you incentivizing the kids in your class to mastery, I guess is my question. I think that would be the defining factor of if it's a constrained or if it's an unconstrained vision. Like what is pushing kids to redo their assignments, to read The Lonely Man of Faith even though they don't have to? Like what is pushing them there?
Good question. So, and that's where I come back to this like apathetic group, right? But let's leave the apathetic out for a second because I haven't figured that out yet. Meaning I haven't figured out the truly apathetic student who has literally like, I don't want good grades. I have no desire for good grades. I'm cool with 70s. Just get me out of this room as quickly as possible because I've given up on myself. Like, meaning that student has essentially said school is not for me, has decided. So to my mind, although I haven't figured out how to do this, I would need to convince that student that you will get more from putting effort into this learning exercise and mastering it, right? It's like the student who comes to the gym, let's go back to that analogy, right? Because the student comes to the gym and just is like, I'm not doing this. I'm not climbing the rope, right? And the great gym teacher figures out how to get them to climb that rope and get to the top. And they suddenly realize, oh, you know what? I could accomplish this, right? That's what I need to do with the apathetic student, although I don't have like the magic bullet to do that. But let's start with the 60% of students, which is still larger than normally get A's. And those are students who actually want to do well. so far, once those students have like made that mental shift to realize I'm on their side. I'm not this person setting up in opposition to them. Here's your due date. You missed your due date. Okay, you're going to have these marks deducted from you. There's nothing I can do about it. That's the way the world works. Get used to it, right? They realize I'm much more, and this is a Ted Sizer idea, like I'm much more of their coach than I am, this opposite person to them, this antagonistic person to them. And so let's go back and do this again. And once that clicks for them, they're like, oh, I really do want to do that. And I've actually had the pleasure of certain students waking up like, oh, I actually want to come back at lunch and retake this quiz 3 or 4 times until I master it because this could be the first class I'm getting a 95 in. And I still have the motivation to do that. Right? I don't really know what to do with the student who's given up and said, I don't have the motivation to do this anymore. It's beyond me, right? Even though it's not. Right? There are some students who say it's beyond me, and it actually is, but that's a very, very small percentage.
You're also teaching senior level classes. Like it's a very high level.
Right. Well, meaning I'm teaching grade 12s, I'm teaching seniors. Only my honors philosophy class is actually, I think, as a class at a higher level than a large number. Meaning my economics and my history classes, I am aiming for them to be at a level that 90% of the students, given the desire, could master.
Right. But some kids are they're never going to understand the concepts of supply and demand. It doesn't matter how many different ways you show them the graph or reframe it or show them a movie.
So that's the question. That's at the core of my question is I would say 9 of 10 can, right? Like 9 of 10 can understand the concept of supply and demand. They can't understand it if I only give them 3 weeks to learn it and give them all a test on it in those 3 weeks and say, too bad, so sad, you lost out. But if I'm willing to be on their side and work with them, 9 of 10 can understand it.
Right. So, I think in your case, the constrained approach to that is going back to what I was saying before about trade-offs, right? That if you want to get that 60% of kids to mastery, there's going to be a significant trade-off for you and for them in terms of their time, right? The amount of time, I don't know, I don't follow you around, but I would imagine the amount of time you invest in planning your lessons and reviewing your lessons and meeting with students one-on-one is wildly in excess of what other teachers do.
For sure.
And I think that the students who want to devote themselves to mastery, for them, there is a very
That's
significant
why it's 60%
trade-off.
right now and not 90%. Right? That meaning I think 90% are capable. 60% are doing it right now. And I don't have these numbers. I hope to work out these numbers because I have about 100 students this year, so it should be sort of an interesting sample. The problem is some repeats, but yeah. Let's just say that. There's definitely a much greater investment, and that's fine. That's a separate problem.
Not just from you, also from the kids. Like that kid who has taken the quiz 4 times, that's 4 lunches that they didn't get to play basketball or hang out with their friends or go to
But what
Starbucks.
I'm seeing is I think 60% will do that. 60% will do that with just by virtue of me shifting the mindset of I'm on your side and with you in this. And I think, by the way, there are other teachers. I'm not the only teacher who's done this. I think you go to other schools and you'll find teachers who are this invested and this willing to do this. We even know some of these teachers who will put in, even if they don't have a whole system that they're developing the way I'm developing it, they're just willing to put in that extra time and they get much better results by virtue of the fact that they're willing to put in the extra
time. They go to the library with the kids on Sundays and they stay after school.
All of that stuff. So I do think that's possible. And yes, I'm putting in more time. And I do think that's an issue that has to be, meaning if this ever were to, expand into something larger, that has to be dealt with. And to me, that's actually just a professional expectation, monetary reward problem. There are lots of professions out there that require huge investments of time, and there are people willing to put in that investment of time. But typically there's monetary reward that comes along with that investment of time. Teaching, as we both know, is a profession that was not built on large investments of time. It's built on lots of time off. It's built on generally fairly well-educated people making a decision, a la Thomas Sowell, about trade-offs, right? And I'd rather have my summers off and have these huge pieces of vacation and, have developed a couple of courses that I've taught every year for 30 years, and I'm pretty darn good at it. And I don't want to be working that hard. So yes, in some sense, it means changing that. I'll add to what you said, though. It's not even so much preparing the classes as much as I find the primary investment of time, and other than the system that I'm trying to build, which requires its own infrastructure, is in marking and feedback, right? Like my whole view of marking, and I'm writing an essay about this, my whole view of marking has changed from this like chore that you have to do because it's the final summative assessment, and I just have to tell you, where you landed at this moment, to this just ongoing practice in the gym, where how I give feedback and the quality of the feedback I give really translates into the next iteration of this practice to see if you can master it.
So I have a question about this as an English teacher, because it's bothering me for 23 years, and I've tried different things. The key to getting better at your writing, right, is to draft, get feedback, redraft. I mean, that's how every author does it. Draft, redraft until you're happy with the final product.
You have edited some of my writing.
Yeah, I remember.
See, I stopped asking you to do that. Now I pay for it.
Now you pay someone. There's only so far that lack of financial incentive would take me. I didn't even get time off. I got literally nothing.
I bet you if I sent you a piece of writing now, you'd still edit it.
I probably would. How do you get kids to take your feedback into account in their next piece of writing is one question. And a follow-up or a corollary to that is, do you go back to your feedback on writing assignment A when you mark writing assignment B to see if the kid has learned from their mistakes in writing assignment A?
I think ideally, yes. I think you that would be the key. And I think, look, I think there is, and this is where what standard are you setting comes in, right? Because I'm sure you've experienced this as an English teacher. I certainly experienced this as a philosophy teacher. It's a mayim she'ein sof. Like you can always be critical to one degree or another, but you have to decide kind of where's the line. And then once I've drawn that line, which is not a simple thing, but once I've drawn that line, now I can define these. I've given you 5 primary pieces of feedback. These are what needs to be addressed, right? And it's the same like any good coach would do. It's, a coach comes in and sees 15 problems in someone's technique, right? It says, we're going to aim to fix these 5 problems. And that's what I'm going to call mastery, right? And that's a hard hard thing to think about, but you can do it. It's not impossible to do. And I think, yes, you'd want to see a full you want to see that all these problems were addressed in future drafts.
Right. I mean, I think that's the ideal. The way most English teachers or social science teachers do it is, oh, you gave me this piece of writing. I gave you the feedback. And in a very constrained way, the feedback that you got earned you this mark. Thanks.
Right.
And that's the end. But how do you, as
an unconstrained thinker, apparently,
how do you, this unconstrained teacher, shoehorn that into the very constrained Ontario system? Right? You have marks that are due. The ministry says no, they have to be done. Kids have to apply to university. Their timeline is not in your control.
So as you know, I was a former principal. So firstly, I'll say this: I think the Ontario system is far less constrained than people think it is. Meaning, if you actually read through Growing Success, the entire thrust of that document is set up for kids to succeed through various different angles and in many different ways, right? For example, one of the things that I think makes sense in a mastery-based marking system, right? If I still need to come up with a single numerical value. In a true mastery-based marking system, there should be no numerical value, right? There should just be feedback on the various skills that you're mastering. But because there is a constraint there, I have a system that means I have to come up with a single numerical mark. But I think mode, right, what you do most consistently is actually a much better way of marking than average, right? You shouldn't have something you did early on count against you if you fix that skill. Well, the ministry has articulated that, has codified that into their Torah, right? And said, you should mark based on most recent and most consistent performance. So that's just one example, but I think the ministry is far more flexible than, bureaucratic principals who want to principals, right? Who want to just check boxes, and frankly, ministry inspectors who do the same thing, who just want to check boxes and show, you've done this, this, and this. I think if you think of the spirit of what the ministry is doing, it's far more flexible. There are certain deadlines that do loom, right? They're fewer than we think, as long as a teacher is willing to extend themselves beyond the academic year and beyond the school day. Right? If they're willing to put themselves out there. I mean, one of the things that I did this year is start using WhatsApp much more for school-related questions because it's accessible, it's easy. Students can just ask a question while they're working on something and screenshot, can take a picture of a page they're reading and say, I'm having trouble understanding this. I can answer them in real time and extend myself beyond the bounds of the school day to actually address learning challenges that they're having. So provided a teacher's willing to do that, the deadlines are far fewer than you think, but university is one of them, right? Like there are just dates where the marks are due for university and, there's nothing you're going to do about that. So first of all, yes, and that's okay, right? Because life actually has real deadlines. Not as many as teachers tell students. Like there's very few, maybe no job out there that will ever demand you have 8 different deliverables at one specific time on a deadline. And if you don't get them in, it's finished. You're going to be totally evaluated on those 8 different deliverables. That's not really the way the world works. The world does not mirror school in that way. But the world also doesn't have endless opportunities. So deadlines do play into it, and those serve for what they serve. So if a student doesn't earn mastery by the time the deadline comes, that's life. That really doesn't have anything to do with what I'm trying to do with them in terms of giving them the opportunity to learn this. They're aware of the deadline. My job is to help facilitate that. So I give them a lot of feedback, a lot of information early. I won't, if they've revised work consistently and haven't gotten there by the deadline, but they're putting in that effort, I'll say, we're not going to count this in that deadline mark. It'll count in the final mark that we have to get to eventually, but it's not going to count in the deadline mark because I'm seeing you're right there and just this deadline came up. So there's some flexibility there. But if a student had 4 weeks to do something and sat on it and didn't do it, and it's still not at mastery, well, that's going to count in your deadline mark, right? So I think you can work with that. But again, I think there are not as many deadlines as we pretend there are.
Do you think that some of your kids, some of the apathetic kids, might be better served if there were more strict deadlines, that could be an incentive or a disincentive, I don't know how you want to think about it, a negative incentive to push them to get their work done?
You're bringing up a great question because Thanks. It's not just the apathetic kids. I was actually just talking about this with a mutual student of ours who thrives on deadlines, meaning he has trouble getting motivated until he knows this is a drop dead date. If I don't do this, I'm going to fail, right? Now, I do give deadlines, meaning every assignment has a due date, but if you're going to allow rework, then, now I might tweak this. I might actually at some point say there has to be something in, but I'm not sure, right? But let's say for now. So he said to me, he struggles because he now my response to him is, okay, now we're talking. Now I'm your coach and we're talking. We have identified a problem that you have, that you can only operate when your back's against the wall, right? This is a life skill you should be working on, right? And I'm willing to, now knowing that actually is, I think, far more ingrained in how people are than they give themselves credit for. Like there are just people who for their entire adult lives will function that way. They only do it when their back's against the wall. Okay, so I'm willing to be a hands-on coach with you. Like I'm willing to text you, to remind you, to encourage you, to set up a schedule for you. Like I'm willing to actually take those steps as a teacher because I see this as a natural barrier for you, right? Hoping, and we'll see how this goes with the students, hoping you'll get there, right? Like you'll be able to push yourself out of this. Maybe if for no other reason this year, then you start to just feel embarrassed or annoyed by me, right? But you will see how, there's some learning value to that. So that's become a feature, and it's not just this student. I mean, there are students who I'm seeing who want to do this, who, and this is not the apathetic group really, right? The apathetic group is I've given up on myself, right? Give me a 70 and leave me alone. This is a group that wants to do well, but really has trouble motivating themselves without those strict deadlines.
One of the things that really stuck out to me was that he said it again and again, and I think, this was the Dvar Torah that I gave this week at school. I didn't even quote this. I didn't even think about it at the time. Was just that, I'll just read what he said because he says it better than I could. He says that definitive evidence cannot be expected on the grand sweep of a vision. A great deal of partial evidence may be accumulated on each side, but the evidence for and against one's vision can be weighed differently, and being convinced is ultimately a subjective process.
This is what I meant when I said vision is like prophecy.
Yeah.
Right? It's who's the prophet? The person people believe. Why do they believe him? Because however they see the accumulation of smaller pieces of evidence gets them there.
And also that you can shoehorn whatever pieces of evidence you want in to make, or discount whatever evidence doesn't work in your favor, to make your vision function. Because the vision that you have is part of who you are, right? It's part of how you identify yourself, how you identify your group. I found it interesting because I'm sure you've experienced this at some point in your life, that you're having a conversation with somebody, a student, a parent. It doesn't matter how much evidence you bring to bear to validate what you're saying. It's irrelevant to them because they have this ingrained vision of who they are as a student, or who their child is as a child, and it just doesn't matter.
How do you address that in a school? How do you address that issue? So you're principal now. You're in the hot seat, right? And this is something I struggled with all the time as a principal. It was, we're just not on the same page. And at some point, I've had many conversations with parents where I'm like, I think we're just going to see this differently, mm-hmm. right? And we can go around in circles about this, but we're not going to get there. But that's not ideal. That's a way of getting a parent off the phone, or trying to move on from a situation. In an ideal world, what I would have wanted as principal is for this to be like a good partnership, right? Where we are both aiming at the same goal, respecting that each other, giving to each other, right? So that, in theory, that doesn't just mean the parent realizes that I'm right. Mm-hmm. in terms of what I'm saying, but that I'm willing to give to the parent's point of view and the parent is willing to give to my point of view. And we're willing to experiment and try different things to get there because we can see that goal clearly. That is not the way most parents that I encountered as principal relate to a school. How do you fix that? So
I think it's part of the system in which we live now. It's endemic to society. You must have come across at some point, Jonathan Haidt's HXA Way. It's very old. It's an online collection of essays, and it's a protocol for basically how to have productive conversations.
I haven't seen it.
It's a 5-part process, and I teach it to my grade 9s. But the crux of it is that at the end of the day, what matters is not that we agree, but that we have increased our knowledge, that we are approaching the truth. And you have to come into that accepting I might be wrong is the hardest part. And second hardest is listening to somebody else honestly, not always looking for the straw man, not always looking for the way to make their argument crumble, but to hear them honestly. And so I think if we can teach our students and our parents somehow any skill, it's to listen to people even if you don't like what they have to say. It's very much...
But how do you change the culture, right? Because I agree with you. Those are the practical tools you can use, right? And you can have better conversations with those tools. But in order to have two willing parties in mm-hmm. that conversation, you have to change the culture that is around that conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's where I see the challenge, right? How do you change that culture?
Sure. So, this comes out of S.U.N.Y, but it's also something I learned from the Mandel Teacher Education Institute. It's a way of approaching these contentious conversations. And basically what you do is you listen to whatever the other person has to say, and rather than addressing the specific arguments that they bring up, you try to identify what is the fundamental value that they are arguing about, right? Like if a parent comes to you frustrated with the discipline that's happening with regard to their son or their daughter, do they really care about the specific disciplinary infractions, or is there some deeper value, right? Their love for their child, maybe, or the fact that they see a lot of themselves in their child, and when you're disciplining their child, they feel personally judged as a parent. Whatever it is, There's some fundamental value.
Okay, that's great.
So I think,
could you say that? Are you comfortable?
so that's the model. The model is you can only do this in person. You can't do this over the phone. You can't do this over the Zoom. This has to be done two human beings sitting in chairs in the same room, actually talking to each other. And you have to lay out the whole framework from the beginning that I want you to say everything you have to say. And you say it all. And then I'm going to mirror back, like very classic teacher, social worker training, mirror back what they say, and then try to identify for them. It sounds to me like you're really concerned about X. And if you're wrong, they'll correct you and say, no, that's not it. And you keep working at it till you get it. But so you tell them in advance, this is what we're going to do. And then I'm going to do the same for you. And I want you, it's a very protracted process. I want you to hear what I have to say. And at the end, I want you to try to identify what the value is that I'm speaking toward. And I would bet our values are very close together. We both really want something very similar. And we're just coming at it, as Sowell says, we're coming at it from different ways. And to have conversations like that with kids and to have conversations like that with parents, it's very protracted. But I think it's very healthy.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's totally worth investing the time, right, to do that. Where I still think there's an obstacle, or at least an obstacle that I still encountered in my experience, and I would, I would write very long emails back to parents often, detailing things for this reason. And it often helped, right, to be able to kind of lay out everything in detail. And this, I think it's worth the time. Where I still encounter the problem is these protocols work when both parties are willing to trust each other enough to engage in that. And I think that the way school is structured now, for a number of parents, that trust is just not there. And not because it's not there with Jonathan or it's not there with Hillel, because it's not there with a person who sits in the principal chair. It's not there with a person who I see as X in this role. And so even before you can get to a protocol, you have to be able to convince this parent that you can be trusted. And frankly, you have to be able to trust the parent that they're willing to, because you're making yourself vulnerable in your own way in this protocol. And that's where I think the structure of school just works against us, because you could come to all the great realizations and you're still just going to have structural obstacles, right, to the problem. Whether that's the teacher that's presenting the disciplinary problem, that is just who that teacher is, nothing's going to change, or the fact that, the school year is going to end and report cards are going to come out or whatever it might be.
Do you think this is a contemporary problem? Like, I can't see my parents ever having gone, I love them, they're wonderful people, but I can't see them ever going to bat for me against a school administrator who had pointed out that I had done something wrong.
No, because definitely not. And I think there's good reasons for that. I mean, there are two reasons for that. One I brought up on a previous podcast, but one is I think our parents just didn't consider this part of their job portfolio. Like figuring out how to navigate unfair situations was not what they do for us, right? Or for figuring out, helping, like clearing on, uncomfortable situations for us. So we were meant to exist in uncomfortable situations. We were meant to have mean teachers. We were meant to have people with emotional imbalance in our lives trying to discipline us. And we were meant to figure out how to deal with it. That's what they did when they were kids. And there was no sense of that. And I don't think it was an ideal. I don't think they were like, this is so good for you. I just think that's how they existed in the world, right? I often think of this. Like if I came home to my parents as a teenager and said, I'm unhappy, right? Like I imagine the response. The response would have been something around like confused to, of course, you're a teenager. That is what you do. You're an unhappy person. Life is unhappy, right? Like that's the way it
read
goes.
Princess Bride.
Exactly. So there's that. We have changed. And I think we've changed because I'm getting a little psychological, but your father was a psychologist. Is a psychologist. We have, I think, some trauma from that. I think we have some trauma from the fact that our parents didn't care. Either they didn't care, we've tried and they didn't care, or we just never even thought to bring them our problems because they didn't care. And we don't want to be those parents. We want to be we remember being kids, and we want to be for our kids what our parents weren't for us.
I think you're speaking only for yourself here. I outsource all school complaints to my spouse.
My kids don't really complain about school yet, but I don't think that would fly specifically in that regard. But I think generally, generationally, like I've had so many parents as a principal come to me and say, I'm going to explicitly say, I'm going to fight for my kid here. I see that as my job, and not in a way that they were like threatening me, or they were just like saying like you got to understand, this is where I'm coming from here. This is my job is to fight for my kid in this regard. And so just like that, let's lay out where we're each coming from here. I'm fighting you. Here we go.
I have said that to parents. Like when I have had parents advocate for their child and then apologize to me for how vociferously they did that. And I always tell them that they don't need to apologize, that they're so-and-so's mom or so-and-so's dad. And it's the right thing for them to do to care about their child. I would.
But is it the right thing for them to advocate?
As long as they're willing to do it in good faith, yes. But I think once you get to the point, you could even start from that point. I don't think it's probably healthy. I think people need to come to the values on their own through discussion. But you could even ask someone up front, if you wanted to start there, if you want to speed up the whole process, what their fundamental value was in coming. I don't know that it would work so well, but it might help to validate that up front.
Do you think in reality, this is like, what skill is prized more in a school administrator? This skill that you're talking about, the ability to actually get to the core of an issue, bring a parent onto your side, or to just give the parent what they want more quickly? What are boards actually looking for? What value is prized more? Which administrators are more popular among parents in the end of the day?
I think it's a question of if you're looking at something in the short term or the long term. In the short term, it's always easier to give somebody what they want. But the truth is that if you give someone what they want, again, I am such a constrained person, you're taking it away from somebody else. Right? So
that's the world. Right?
Now there's the constraint coming out. And so, but by making somebody else happy, by making one parent happy, you're going to make a different parent or teacher or child upset. You're never going to make them all happy. Abraham Lincoln knew what he was talking about.
Right. But I find the successful school administrator is the one who reads the room the best and knows who he can make unhappy and who he needs to make happy, or she, for that matter, needs to make happy at a given moment in time. And that these types of long-term, and again, I think it comes back to the fact that parents do not see school as being on their side. And schools, in turn, do not see parents as being on their side. This is an antagonistic relationship from the start. On individual levels, it happens. There are individual administrators who can do this. There are individual teachers who can do this. But I haven't seen schools that do this well, right? Like as a whole, maybe for a short period of time and so on. But typically, once you get to the institutional level, there just seem to be too many variables at play that everyone kind of retreats into their corners to some extent.
Do you think this is possibly because parents by nature see their kids in an unconstrained sort of way, that this kid has limitless potential?
That's really interesting, because
the job of the school is to put a mark on their kid and to say, this kid is grade A, grade B, or this kid will go this far and no farther. I have determined at the age of 15 that Franklin will never be a marine biologist. And
this is the same idea that everyone is a socialist in their family, right? Like every family is a socialist institution, right? And so maybe it's the same thing. Everyone is totally unconstrained in their family. They have this again betrays our thoughts on it, but they have unrealistic messianic visions of what can happen within their family, and then the school is the constraining mechanism on that.
Right, and that forces them into that antagonistic framework that you're talking about.
Well, we're going to end as we started. That's pretty good. Thanks, Jonathan.
That was a great ending. That was very clean and not weird at all. Thank you.
Well, if it's weird, it was for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.